and we're going to interact with the folks that are in the chat. So.
And first in-person interview, right? So
yes, this is in person. Absolutely. So guys, the theme for this one is determination and motivation. So I want to just give a quick story of how I know Roman. I know Roman Roman actually worked with me when I started as a software engineer at a company called Red Prairie. And basically I was leading a project, and Roman was one of my first college grad engineers that I had working for me. And that's how I met Roman. And ever since, Roman and I have been great friends ever since then. It was a great experience. He was one of the first people that I actually managed. And he's gone to have an absolutely exceptional career here in Milwaukee at McGregor Partners. One of the things that is very important for this message that I want people to hear is that the theme on this one is really determination and persistence. And the reason why I think Roman, his personality signifies this is because, I told my wife this the other day. She said, "What is it that makes you want to interview Roman?" And I said, "I just remember him as a software engineer, and if you went to Roman's desk, what you would actually see is his notes and letters in his cubicle." And I was like, I always wanted to know what the notes in the cubicles were. So I started to read them. And what they all were either rejection letters to universities that he applied for, or either positions that he applied for that he didn't get. But he kept them, and he kept them around, and they actually were posting in his cube. And I was like, dude, like, why is it that you keep these things? And he's going to talk about why he keeps them in this podcast. But I just thought that that was something that really stuck out to me about Roman. And we are in his new building right now. They just came in. They just expanded to a new office here in downtown Milwaukee. And of course, I go into his office, and right behind the door, he still has those letters in his office. So. Again, when I talk about persistence and determination, and it's going to be a key theme into this podcast. But so Roman, for people to understand who you are, I think I did a pretty, I would say, a not so extravagant introduction to who you are. Tell people who you are.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting question. So, in a lot of these types of conversations, I focus more on my professional career, but it sounds like you want to get into more like what my wife would call stubbornness,
yep.
And just kind of what makes me tick. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in a small town, Little Chute, Wisconsin,
yep.
Population of around 10,000 people. I have 3 younger brothers. My father was a small business owner, actually a 3rd generation small business owner. So for anyone out there listening that lives in the Fox Valley who needs any flowers, hit up Reynebeau Floral. But just being in that type of environment, it really gave me a great example, not only for the responsibility that it takes to be in a leadership position, and just kind of seeing the everyday grind that it takes to be successful in a role like that.
Yep.
But also all the pain
yep.
that comes along with it, and the, I guess, determination, if you will. Now, if you ask my wife, I think she would probably refer to that as stubbornness, yep. But I like the way you phrased it better. So I grew up in a small town. My father, like I said, was a small business owner, and if you think about flowers, it's not exactly a thriving business. When I was younger, there was really only one place to get flowers, but nowadays you can get flowers on the internet, you can get them at the gas station, grocery store, whatever, so not exactly a growing market.
Right.
And at the time where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, of course, taking over the family business was an option. I decided to be my own man and walk a different path, and God bless my parents' souls, they've been very supportive in that. I went to college, got a bachelor's degree in software engineering, and when I first started my career, that's when I met up with Antoine.
Very cool, very cool. We have some people in the house right here. Miss Tiffany Wade is in the house, Mr. Rowe, and my brother, Mr. Clark Wade, is in the house too. Guys, thank you for joining the chat. Please, let's make this very interactive. Let's continue to kick it off. So you kind of talked about your education. You went to college, Roman. Talk about the education that you have as an undergrad, also as a after undergrad, right? You have a master's. So tell people a little bit about your education.
Sure. Well, I am the first Reynebeau in my direct lineage to get a bachelor's degree. So when I was at that critical stage in life where everybody is asking you what you want to do, I was very confused, didn't have a whole lot of guidance. My dad had an associate's degree, but he never really did anything with it. And just in general, my parents were very laissez-faire in terms of parenting. They're very supportive in anything that I decided that I wanted to do, but they didn't really push me in one direction or another.
Yeah.
And I kind of stumbled into this whole software engineering thing. So I'd always been interested in playing around with gadgets, technology, etc. And at a young age, I kind of showed an aptitude for mathematics and logic problems and things like that. And when I was deciding what I wanted to do, I had applied to a couple colleges, but I really wasn't taking the whole thing very seriously, to be honest with you.
Yep. A lot of us do that when we were growing up, not sure exactly which way to go.
And part of the reason I didn't take it very seriously is I just had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't really passionate about anything, and I just was looking for my path. So at a certain point, although I had been accepted to some other UW schools for just like general education without declaring a major, at the time ITT Tech was really big and they're airing commercials all the time. So I said, that's interesting. I think their tagline was education for the future, something along those lines.
I remember those commercials.
And it always seemed like almost science fiction. So I'm a huge science fiction fan. I love Star Trek, Star Wars, you name it. I read a lot of science fiction, and the way it was marketed, it just felt like a natural fit. So I showed up, talked to them, and I enrolled in a software engineering program. And unlike many people, I lucked out and I was able to find something that not only did I enjoy, but I was actually kind of good at on my first try. So I have plenty of friends out there that have cycled through 4 or 5 different majors. I'm sure you have the same.
Yep.
And for me, I was lucky to find what I was looking for on the first try, and I've stuck with it and just kind of gradually grown from there. So the interesting thing about my schooling is that because it was a technical program, it was a little bit different than the traditional computer science program, if you will. So the analogy that I always use is a technical program is going to teach you, to use an auto mechanic analogy, a technical program is going to teach you how to do things like rotate the tires, change the oil filters, that sort of thing, get some true practical hands-on experience. And many traditional university programs focus a lot more on the high-level design. So a lot of young computer science students that we see, that we interview, they could perhaps design an engine and tell you which engines would be better for certain situations, or I could give them specifications on how to design an engine. But if I asked them to actually implement that engine, to manufacture it, to build it, or even to change the oil filter or rotate the tires, they'd be completely lost.
Yes. Yep.
So that was kind of my mindset coming in, where I didn't have the same prestigious like design level background that some other engineers did, but I was very comfortable kind of getting things done and getting my hands dirty in the shop.
Yep.
So from there, I was able to land an internship. I was able to land a couple other full-time jobs, and one thing I didn't mention earlier is that I took all of my classes on the weekends and at nights. So from my perspective, especially with the tuition prices that ITT Tech was charging at the time, I'm sure many of you out there can relate to that. Tuition is expensive.
It's very expensive.
And
yes.
For me, coming out of high school, not really caring, not really trying, that was easy because I didn't have any skin in the game.
Yep.
But for someone that was actually paying for it, it was a completely different mindset. So I actually started to try a little bit harder, And I'm still thankful to my parents for this day. I never would have been able to pay tuition without them. I took out student loans and I had to beg my dad to co-sign for me because when he saw the bill, he's like, wow, you want me to co-sign for that? That is a large chunk of money, my friend.
Yes.
So I convinced him that I was good for it, I would pay it back, and he was safe co-signing. But just having that ROI perspective, I would strongly encourage anyone out there that's considering a college program to look at it with that mindset, because there's a lot of programs out there that don't necessarily have the same return on investment, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
So there's some very honorable, noble professions out there that it's gonna cost a lot to become educated, and it might not be as lucrative as a career. And if you're okay with that, then that's great. But
Right.
a lot of people just enroll in college and think that you're going to get this giant payday, but that's not necessarily the case in every profession. So,
Well, you're absolutely right, and a lot of that too, Roman, is even if you do spend the money to get a great education, a lot of it is based on what you're willing to put in, right, afterwards.
Exactly.
Right, because
Exactly.
the education can be there, but if you don't have that determination to succeed, and the will to do it, and the ability to face the rejections that are going to hit you in the face once you get out, you're not going to get to where you need to get. Go. So yeah, continue on. You talked about your undergrad. Now, one of the things that I know about you is you are a highly educated person. You went back to get your master's, and you're one of the people that really influenced me. If you knew this or not, I don't know if you knew this, to go back and get mine and just get it done. So when Roman was my software engineer at the time, he was looking at grad school programs and he was applying, and of course, there were some rejections and things like that. He was studying for the GMAT, and I tried to study for the GMAT and just never got to a point where I was on a consistent schedule, and my work had a lot to do with that as well. But me seeing Roman applying, and him having time to study and commit, even though we were working probably similar hours, and just on the road quite a bit as well too. Me seeing that really helped push me to say, okay, well, if Roman can do it, and Roman was at I think you were 24 at the time, or 22. Yep. I was like, if Roman can do it, I can certainly do it. So when you got accepted in the end, I was like, I can't have an excuse anymore. Like there's no excuse for me not to go back and do something that I want to do, but also I had as a goal of mine to get done as well. So, you help push me to go back and get mine and just say, what, there's no excuses. I don't care if you're on the road, 200 something days out of a year. I don't care if you're working 60 hours a week, get it done. Right. So talk about your grad school program. Sure. And your grad school education.
All right. So just to give everyone kind of an insight into where my head was at, I don't know if you remember this or not, but one thing that Antoine communicated to me years later, after I don't think we're even working together anymore, but he told me, Roman, when you first started, you annoyed the hell out of me.
I probably did say it.
You were always asking questions, and you were always asking why.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just a personality trait, but I really enjoy having a seat at the table. And anytime someone asks me to do something, normally my first question is why. Yeah. So part of my motivation into going down the MBA route was I wanted to have more influence at the company that I was working for, and take on more responsibility and be involved in more decision making.
Right.
And in order to get there, especially working in corporate America, nowadays so many people have a bachelor's degree that in order to stand out, having a master's degree does help. So those were my initial motivations for pursuing a program like that.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, both of us were working pretty long hours at the time. We were traveling all over the country, and not the places you want to be traveling to necessarily. Spent a lot of time at lonely warehouses in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi, Pennsylvania, yep, Tennessee, etc. But anyway, so the big challenge for people like us who are traveling so much is that you can't commit to being in person. So I looked at local programs like Marquette, UW Milwaukee, UW Madison, etc., and they all had fantastic programs. But even being home on the weekend, I couldn't necessarily commit to, because as you know, we had at times very aggressive timelines that would require you to work over the weekends at times. So I just couldn't make that commitment. And I was very fortunate at the time where the perception was just starting to shift, where a lot of people don't remember this, but initially online education was almost like a faux pas, where you'd have maybe the University of Phoenix or a couple other early entrants out there battling with these very prestigious old institutions like Harvard, Yale, etc. And they looked at it like it was almost a lesser version of education. And they would say, well, why are we going to tarnish our brand and have some sort of online education? They didn't view it as the future mechanism to deliver education in a more effective way. So I was lucky enough where I got in on the ground floor at Indiana University. They're one of the first major institutions to start offering an online program. And it was a fantastic program. They understood that you can do the work remotely, but in order to be effective, you really need to curate those relationships.
Yep.
So the first thing that they did was they had the entire cohort show up in Bloomington for what they call Connect Week. And that was 2 weeks in August, so I had to use paid time off for this. My girlfriend, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was not very happy that I wasted 2 weeks of PTO on this, but it was a great time, and it really did help just building relationships for people that are located maybe in Japan or Brazil or anywhere around the globe, where now you have this face to put to a name.
Yep.
And it's no longer just kind of a faceless avatar behind the keyboard. You actually have personal relationships with your classmates. It allowed you to work remotely a lot more effectively, and it definitely stoked the embers of competition as well.
Yep. No, and what it sounds like, it was an immersion week for the people that were jumping into this program together, right? I just remember doing the exact same thing at Georgia Tech, and even though we were in classes on the weekends for us, it was still, we had an immersion week, because that's really how you build those relationships, because that first 2 weeks are typically pretty brutal from a workload perspective.
Yes.
And not only that, you get assigned your groups, and you have to figure out how to work with people, and that's how you become such great friends with these people, because you end up finding some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, and working together, and before you know it, they're part of your network, right? So no, that's a good point. So Roman, something that you said in here was a sacrifice that you had to make when you were working, and you just came into this grad school program, and yet you had to take the 2 weeks of personal time off in order for you to do that. Talk about sacrifices, and kind of this is going to be a two-part question, because one of the theme here is really that determination, persistence, and stuff like that you have. And talk about the sacrifice that you've made, and also talk about some of the setbacks that you've had in life and how you overcame those.
Okay.
Two-part question.
All right.
Sacrifices, and then some of the setbacks.
Well, I guess I'll tell a story first before I get into some of the details. But I was reading through some of the literature that you had on Black Heights, and I always remember you talking about Madden. You're a big Madden guy, right? So I myself was a gamer in a past life. I was never hardcore into Madden, but I played Madden. I was more of like a MMO kind of guy, or an RPG kind of guy. But anyway, I currently do not own a PS4. I don't own an Xbox One. I still have my 360, but it has a very thick layer of dust on it. So just that to me is kind of a representation of some of the things that you're going to need to cut out of your life if you want to be successful. So not saying that you can't play video games and be successful, but there's certain things that you need to take a hard look at and just prioritize what you want to pursue in life. There's only 24 hours in a day, and whether it's family, relationships, work, video games, whatever your personal and professional goals are, you need to prioritize the stuff that you really want to get after, number one, and all that other stuff, if you can get to it, that's nice, but sometimes it's going to fall by the wayside. So when you talk about sacrifice, for me, it was sleep, I guess. So I would say sleep and just a little bit of personal life. So For me, I wanted to get this done as quickly as possible. So I did my MBA in 2 years. I could have went a little bit more aggressive with it, but because of my work schedule, that would have been a little bit iffy, and I didn't want my work to suffer because of this. But if you talk to my wife or my friends or anybody that was close with me during that time, they'll all tell you that, you know, I didn't come out very much.
Yeah.
I just, and that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. I was just prioritizing something that I wanted to do. Now, would I recommend that type of work-life balance long-term? Absolutely not, because I think it's important to have friendships and make sure that you take care of those personal relationships. But at the same time, for me, it was just a 2-year commitment, and I felt that it would be a really big benefit to my career. So I decided I wanted to get it, and I did everything that I needed to go get it. The one thing I would recommend to anybody that's looking at a program like that is it needs to become a habit. So I don't know what your experience was, Antoine, but for me, I went to the same coffee shop every Saturday from 8 a.m. to about 1 or 2 p.m. And at a certain point, I was on a first name basis with the baristas because I was there every Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly which weekdays they were, but I want to say it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, something like that, where you come home, you're tired, or you're on the road, you come back to your hotel room, and all your coworkers that want to go out for a drink, dinner, whatever, you have to be very judicious in planning your time and saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I need to work on my schoolwork or study or whatever for these 3 hours, and at a certain point it just becomes a habit and you don't even think about it.
So you made sacrifices by cutting away some of the extra weight that you had from a standpoint of, okay, the video games, right? Some of the personal things that you enjoyed to do, and that you couldn't do anymore because you had to make that sacrifice in order for you to reach a goal of getting your MBA. You had to cut some of these things out of your life that wasn't important at that point in time. You know, that's something that I think we all have to do, and that's really around the prioritization and also planning as well, right? And when you have, you know, certain goals that you want to accomplish, you have to prioritize what's more important at that point in time, and a lot of it is comes with sacrifice, right? Things that you enjoy you enjoy doing, you just can't do them anymore, like video games. I think Mr. Rowe, he has a question that he actually put in here was. He had a podcast the other day about losing weight, and that's kind of what I meant by losing weight. And it wasn't physically losing weight out of your body; it's just losing the extra stuff that you actually have that's going on in your life at that point in time, and getting rid of it at that point in time too, in order for you to accomplish your goals and yada yada yada. Talk about the setbacks. So I'll get to your question, Mr. Rowe, but talk about the setbacks that you've encountered, Roman, and how you've been able to overcome some of those. You talked about sacrifice already.
So Antoine mentioned some of my rejection letters earlier.
Yep.
Part of those rejection letters were from graduate schools that I had applied to. So part of the challenge that I experienced in that regard was ITT Tech was a nationally accredited institution. And again, being the first person to attend college in my family, really didn't have any guidance or didn't exactly, I wasn't familiar with the nuance of accreditation, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So when you hear the word nationally accredited versus regionally accredited, nationally sounds better, but in fact, it's the institutions who are regionally accredited that actually have more prestige, if you will.
Yeah.
And when I was applying to different graduate schools, I found out, unfortunately, that there were some schools that were unwilling to recognize my bachelor's degree because they were a regionally accredited institution and ITT Tech was a nationally accredited institution. So I went back and forth with a lot of different colleges trying to figure out where I wanted to go, who would accept me, et cetera, and I'm not sure if you remember this, but there was one college in particular, I won't mention their name, that I was very frustrated by because if you look at their criteria for acceptance, they had very discrete things that were listed on their criteria, and regional accredited bachelor's degree is not one of them. So when I got my rejection letter from them, I of course followed up on it, wanting to know what my shortcomings were, to see if I could improve, whatever. And the only thing that they called out was the accreditation of my bachelor's degree. And it turned into this long fight with me calling them and almost harassing them because I wanted my $200 application fee refunded because that wasn't listed as a requirement. Long story short, I didn't win that battle, but you referred to it as determination earlier.
Yep.
Again, my wife lovingly refers to it as stubbornness. And one thing you have to understand about me is when someone tells me I can't do something, that motivates me a lot.
Yeah.
So the fact that I applied to a bunch of different schools and put myself out there and they told me that I wasn't good enough for their institution, it kind of gave me that extra motivation to dig my heels in and try even harder. And eventually I found Indiana University, and I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. And I actually think that I'm happy that I didn't get accepted into some of those other institutions because it made me who I am today. And I really, really enjoy the Indiana program. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, let's see, that's a plug for Indiana right there. Mr. Rowe said, we got some comments here. Let's go to a question. Mr. Billy Rowe said, how do you navigate the challenges of people close to you not being supportive of your dreams? It's a good question, man.
Tough one. So, like I said earlier, I've been pretty blessed in that regard where my wife is always extremely supportive of me. My parents have always been extremely supportive, but like I said earlier, anytime someone that I'm talking to or someone in my circle tells me that I can't do something, then I just want to prove them wrong.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Whether it's my parents or my wife or a close friend or whatever, I don't know if it's just a personality trait or how exactly to describe it, but there's a lot of competition there, and my wife has learned almost to manipulate me over the years, where if she wants me to do something, she'll tell me that I can't do it.
I think she's learned pretty well.
Yeah, she's learned that reverse psychology. So I guess I'm sure you're probably asking for a specific situation, so I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question per se, but I would just encourage anyone out there to not give up on your dreams, continue to just be persistent,
yep.
and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something, because if you look at a lot of successful people out there, it's not typically the credentials that get them there. So I went through an MBA program. Yeah, that's great. But I don't accredit my success specifically to an MBA.
Right.
And most of the people that you see out there, they're not necessarily valedictorians or the people that come from the most prestigious backgrounds.
Right, right.
If you read through their autobiographies, biographies, literature, or anything that they put out there, in most cases, they just attribute their success to just sticking with something and being persistent, being resourceful.
Yep, very good, very good. Billy said this is his first year on Xbox. This is his first year. My Xbox Live membership has expired, and he has not renewed it immediately. As a result, he said his YouTube content has improved. Absolutely, brother. Tamara Wade says, so true, success requires some kind of sacrifice. And Billy said, yeah, absolutely, good morning. Hi, Mom. We got a lot of people on in the family, so yes, let's continue to move on. Thank you guys for all joining the chat and participating. I think this is wonderful that you all are in the chat and you're chatting amongst each other too. We talked about sacrifice, we talked about setbacks, right? Let's talk about you being an entrepreneur, right? And what got you into entrepreneurship, starting a business and becoming the person that you are in this position at McGregor and Partners right now. Talk about that. Okay.
Well, I mentioned earlier that my personality can be a little bit annoying at times because I'm always asking the question why.
He asked me too, why do I need to have this interview? Just kidding.
So I talked about some of my motivations about getting my MBA earlier and wanting to have more influence, be involved in more decision-making process, etc. Well, at a large company, to get to a point where you're involved in significant decision-making capabilities, it takes a long time. And for me, call this maybe not putting in my time or being arrogant or cocky or whatever. I viewed entrepreneurship as kind of like a shortcut, where I'm skipping a lot of the in-between, but I felt like I could figure it out as I went. And I mentioned earlier that my father was a small business owner, and had I stayed in the family business, I would have been a fourth generation owner. So I think having my father available to me for just mentorship, questions, etc., and seeing all the struggles that he endured growing up was a big influence on just building up my confidence and kind of thinking that I could do this.
Yeah.
So again, for me, it's not necessarily like power or control. I like knowing why. I like being a part of the decision-making process and having a seat at the table, and that's why entrepreneurship was so appealing to me.
It sounds like to me, Roman, you're saying, if I was to kind of recap that it was a way for you to get a seat at the table, but also to fast track your career, because one thing I learned about entrepreneurship is you can wear many hats. And being in a corporate world, a lot of the times, you are put into positions and there's a power struggle a lot of the times for people that's above you. And sometimes you're not even given the opportunity to learn because there's somebody right above you who has that role already, right? Entrepreneurship certainly does allow you to accelerate your growth and your learning. I'm finding it out right now of being the CEO and the founder of Black Heights. You have to do a lot of things on your own because otherwise it's not going to get done, right? Talk about how you've been able to grow McGregor and Partners over the last couple of years and what your role is with McGregor and Partners.
Okay. Well, this term is overused. You mentioned wearing many hats, but I don't know of a better way to explain it. So it's funny you bring up the corporate world versus the small business world, because part of my frustration in my last position was that there were some high-level decisions being made that I didn't necessarily agree with. And I did my best to ask why in my own way and try to influence those decisions, and the response that I kept getting back was just do what you're told.
Yeah.
And that really wasn't adequate to me. So basically I was in a position where I was being told to put on my blinders and not look at the company as a whole, but to just focus on my individual job and to press this button. Pressing this button is your job. We don't care what you think about the company. We don't care what you think about anything else, other departments, etc. We just want you to focus on doing this one thing.
Yep.
And for me, I have no issue having a primary responsibility, but I think every person in a company should have some sort of voice in the operations of the company, and something that might impact the support organization could impact sales or vice versa, and everything in between. So I think it's very important that people talk to each other, and that was one of my biggest frustrations coming from a corporate environment. So fast forward to my time at McGregor, like you mentioned, I was one of the early employees who joined, and I've been lucky enough to help spin up some new lines of business and also to open up the office, which is our headquarters here in Milwaukee.
Yep.
So think about everything that entails. Obviously, I come from a software engineering background and I lead the product development and engineering team. That's all kind of in my wheelhouse, and that's where I felt comfortable. But I've also been put in a lot of situations where it was very outside my comfort zone, and I just kind of had to figure things out as I went. So for example, this office that we're sitting in, this was my responsibility to negotiate the contract with the landlord, figure out where we wanted to set up operations, even everything down from picking out the carpet and deciding which desks to do. So that was definitely something that I never in a million years would have had an opportunity to do working in a corporate environment. I've also been involved a lot more on the business development side of the business. So that's been really interesting. I got my first taste in sales as a young college student selling cell phones. And my boss had this checklist that we had to go through, and we were always pushing people to upsell on stuff that people didn't need. And I did not do well in that setting. So I always hooked people up with packages that actually made sense for their lifestyle, but I'd always get reprimanded for not upselling them on stuff, and it just wasn't my cup of tea. So that was my introduction to sales and why I thought that it really wasn't for me. But having an opportunity at McGregor to be more involved on the business development side of things, I've discovered that especially in a B2B environment, sales is all about relationships. I love talking to people, I love building relationships, I love having a good time. And if you believe in the product and your product is going to provide value and solve problems for people, then you don't need to be like a flashy used car salesman. You just need to be someone that understands your customer's business and can articulate how it's going to provide value to them. And if you can do that, then sales is easy.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
I've actually been surprising myself that I actually have been kind of enjoying that.
Yep. That's my role right now, actually.
So,
never thought it would actually work for myself, but you're absolutely right. If you can articulate a message and be able to build a relationship based on trust with your customer, and your solutions do provide value, and they can actually see that and provide some sort of return on investment that they're going to be able to spend with you, or on that spend with you, sales is actually quite easy. You don't have to be the guy with the clean shaved face and the slick back hair, and the 6'10" and looking like whatever, right? An old guy, whatever the situation is. That's the stereotypical salesman, but it's not that difficult if you are a people person and really can build a good relationship with the customers. But also you do have to have the backing of a solution that actually can provide value for your customers, right? Because you can have a good relationship, but if your solution doesn't work and you don't trust it yourself, and you can't show that you trust it and have been believe that you trust it and can articulate a message behind it, they're not going to sell from you, no matter if they like you. Yeah. Very good.
People
very good.
are smart. They pick up on that sort of thing. If you don't believe in the product, they're not going to.
100%. So, one of the things about you, Roman, is you live in Milwaukee and you are a technologist. Define why do you consider yourself a technologist?
Well,
because I'm a gadget guy. I wouldn't call myself to be a technologist. I'm a gadget guy. I have a Amazon Echo, Google, Home, all these things over the house. I like cell phones, I like cameras, I like all sorts of stuff that's sitting on your table right now that I couldn't get working for the last 30 minutes before we started the show. Laptops and all that stuff. I'm a gadget guy. You're a technologist. Talk about, you being a technologist.
Sure. Well, honestly, I don't really think it's that far off from what you're describing. So technologist is almost just kind of a fancy way of saying that I play around with technology all the time. So to me, it is someone that is constantly evaluating technology, and if you've been paying attention over the last decade, it's really amazing how far we've come as a society. So if you look at the trend line for innovative technology going back thousands and thousands of years, normally your life was pretty similar to your parents' life, and that your parents had a very similar life to their parents, and so forth and so forth. There really wasn't very many disruptions in terms of technology, at least not quickly. So starting in the 1880s, whenever you want to zero in on the industrial age, that's kind of kicked off a new wave of electricity, manufacturing, etc. And now that we've hit the information age, it has just exploded. And people think that there is some sort of, what's the right word? People think that you need to have a certain level of training or aptitude to work with this stuff. But even the people that have been in this, let's say 10, 20 years, it's very challenging to keep up with the new technology that comes out. Like legitimately, we use Amazon Web Services for all of our hosting. And I get release announcements for them probably once a week. Now, try to keep up with that. And that's just one drop in the pond.
Wow.
That's just one small thing. So trying to keep your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening these days, it can be very overwhelming. But my point here is that being a technologist doesn't mean that you have to have a fancy degree. It doesn't mean that you have to come from a certain pedigree or have a certain amount of experience. It just means to me that you enjoy experimenting with new technology and kind of keeping an eye on what's being released.
Yep, very cool, very cool. Ms. Tamara Wade had a question, and she mentioned this in the chat. You mentioned that you have younger siblings. Being the first in your family to receive your bachelor's degree and master's, did that set the bar for your siblings to attend college, or at least think about it?
Wow, great question. So that's actually a bit of a sensitive subject in the Reynebeau household. So I would say that out of the 4 Reynebeau siblings, 2 of us, myself included, are more inclined towards intellectual type positions, and the other 2 are much more inclined to hands-on type positions. So of all the brothers, one of my brothers is doing very well for himself. He has a degree in, I want to get this right, I think it's automated machine robotics. I don't remember exactly what AMR stands for, but he works in a shop building machine parts and programming robots and stuff like that. It's still kind of loosely on the cusp of technology. He's not necessarily doing programming or stuff like that, but he's working with big machines, robots, etc. all day, creating different parts for manufacturers. So he's doing very well for himself. And my youngest brother, who's the one that I think has a great mind for more intellectual type things, he has an associate's degree from UW-Fox Valley, but he just got his gen eds and never actually went forward with declaring a major or getting his bachelor's degree or anything like that. So I normally call him about once a week and try to encourage him to finish that, try to encourage him to get in a computer science program, et cetera, but ultimately I can give him as much advice as I would like to, but until he decides that that's something that he wants to do, it's not going to happen. But for anyone else out there that is interested in more of a technology-related field, I think it's a great career option for anyone out there, regardless of what your background is, because there's so much opportunity out there. It doesn't even have to be programming per se. It could be marketing for a technology company. It could be support for a technology company. It could be sales for a technology company. There's a lot of other functions that need to be filled within a business, but if you have any inkling of technology background, it always helps. And I know I don't have any statistics in front of me from a national level, but just in Milwaukee alone, the top 20 fastest growing positions that are projected for the next 10 years, I think the vast majority of them didn't even exist 5 years ago. And I think the exact number is around, I want to say 30,000 new jobs projected to be created in the Milwaukee area alone in the next 5 years. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's fun, it's exciting, it's challenging. That's one of the things I love about working in technology is no day is ever the same. There's always really interesting problems to solve if you enjoy solving puzzles or working on problems, that sort of thing. And the best thing about it that I love, and I'm sure you can talk about this as well, is just the flexibility.
Absolutely.
So in the past, when you had more manufacturing jobs, it was a very 9 to 5 mindset where everyone had to be physically in the same building together, and you're working with your hands. And with these information type positions, all you really need is a laptop and an internet connection, maybe a cell phone. But the great thing about that is you can choose to live, depending on the company, but most companies are pretty progressive with these nowadays. You can choose to live wherever you want to. You can make the life that you want to. If you want to live in San Francisco, great. If you want to live in Milwaukee, amazing. If you want to live in New York, Australia, Africa, Europe, wherever, you can have a successful career, and all you really need is the skills that you bring to the table electricity,
Yeah.
a laptop,
Internet.
and a cell phone. That's pretty much it.
No, that's true. That's true. I tell people all the time, when I give coaching, and especially for the folks who are, going into college or, family members and things like that, I always talk about like this STEM, right? Science, technology, and engineering and math being like the areas that you really want to focus on. And out of those, if you're, gaining skills and for corporations or for business in general around, the 5 components of a business, which is around, the finance, the operations, right? Sales, the marketing, research, and the marketing. If you have some sort of knowledge in those areas, you're always going to have a job for the most part, right?
Yes.
It's just what it is, right? So, telling people that, the STEM is really where to go, and it's true. It's where it's going, right? And Roman just said a highlight or mentioned a highlight of a statistic, within Milwaukee itself, 30,000 new jobs within the next, 5 to 10 years or whatever it is. Could be shorter than that. That's a lot of jobs, and that means that's employment. That means there's opportunities out there if you get into these areas of focus for your education. You're going to be employed, and not only that, you're going to have a lot of flexibility in your career and have a pretty exciting career too. So technology is wonderful. You talked about Milwaukee. You are an avid Milwaukee. How I would say you back Milwaukee as the city. It is your home. You blog about Milwaukee and how it's actually a fantastic place to live and a fantastic place for people to start businesses and for entrepreneurship. What makes Milwaukee unique? I think of this about Milwaukee. I went to school here at Milwaukee. Certainly a diverse city, a lot going on. I never would have thought it was a technology hub. It just doesn't strike me as a technology hub. I love the city of Milwaukee. I fell in love with it when I was at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And I think it's really one of the most underrated cities in the United States, especially in the summertime. Wintertime, absolutely not. It's probably the last on the list. but tell the audience, what is it that is about Milwaukee that is driving businesses here, and why the technology and entrepreneurship is thriving here in the city? Because you're in the middle of it.
Sure. All right, so I've got a lot to say on this topic, so I'll start from a business perspective. Like you mentioned, I've written many blog posts about this, so my number one point that I bring up to any entrepreneur who's looking at starting a business somewhere is a lot of people get pressured to start their company in San Francisco, so in the Bay Area.
Yep.
And like I mentioned earlier, in the past, everyone needed to be under one roof. You had to be working with your hands, etc. That's not the case today. So when you look at the costs that are involved in starting a business in today's world, 30 years ago, it might have cost you $5 million on average. In today's world, you can theoretically start a business with a laptop, a cell phone, and maybe a credit card with a couple $1,000 limit on it.
Yep.
You can get started very, very quickly. So you don't even need an office because everyone can be located remotely. So when you look at your major costs, especially in the early days, by far and away, it's going to be labor. That's it. So you don't need an office. You're going to have to buy people laptops, which typically are a couple $1,000s a pop.
Right.
But other than that, unless you want to go through a very expensive, like major sales and marketing initiative, the vast majority of your costs are going to be labor spend.
Yep.
So when you look at a locale like the Bay Area, it's among the highest cost of living in the entire world, and along with that comes the highest average salaries and compensation. So from a business owner standpoint, when you look at your burn rate, which is how fast you're spending money, so let's say you raise $10 million from a venture capital firm.
Yep.
It's basically a ticking time bomb that says, okay, you have $10 million, you have until your bank account hits zero to become profitable or sustaining. Once that happens, if you're not profitable or if you can't raise any more money, not only is your reputation ruined, but everyone that you've worked so hard to recruit is now out of a job.
Yes.
So a very stressful situation, of course. And if you look at the average compensation in the Milwaukee area, or really anywhere in the Midwest, compared to the average compensation in the Bay Area, it's significantly lower. So you're talking, you can potentially cut your labor costs in half, if not more. Not only that, but Milwaukee, surprisingly, many people don't realize this, but they have a very great educational system.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
MPS, which is their public schooling system, does get some flack from time to time, but from a collegiate perspective, they have world-class universities right here in the city limits. So UW-Milwaukee, Marquette, Milwaukee School of Engineering, those are just the three that are inside the city limits. But within the Milwaukee Metro, we've got 20 plus collegiate universities that are in the area. We're churning out hundreds of thousands of students every year.
That's amazing.
And that is the lifeblood to any organization. If you want to be successful, you need people that are trained in the latest technologies that are going to help you take it to the next level and really leverage these new disruptive technologies to create a competitive advantage for your business. So
absolutely.
Not only do you have access to great talent, but it's going to cost you a lot less. So from a business perspective, at least from an entrepreneurial perspective, that is by far and away the number one reason why you should start a business in Milwaukee or just the Midwest in general.
I can tell you this from the standpoint of the cost perspective, Roman. Living in San Jose, which is considered the Bay Area, it's very expensive, and salaries are high.
Yep.
Cost of living is very high. It is a brain. How I would say this is, it's really the brains of the technology industry, though. So there's a lot of resources that are out there, and I think that's a lot of that. I would say the cost itself of living in the salaries, especially for small businesses that are trying to kick off, it's very difficult to survive in the world out there like
exactly.
that, right? Yeah.
And not only that, but you also have to look at the domain that you're serving. So. When you look at Milwaukee, they actually have, I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say it's close to a dozen companies that are in the Fortune 500.
Well, I didn't know that.
These are traditional brick and mortar companies that have a lot of domain expertise.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to disrupt an industry, you want to be close to your customers.
Agreed.
So when you look at some of the areas that Milwaukee excels in, a lot of people think about beer, cheese, etc., that sort of thing, but it's so much more than that. They have leading companies in financial services. They have leading companies in manufacturing, world leaders in manufacturing. They also have a lot of health-related technology companies, as well as water technologies, being in such close proximity to the Great Lakes.
Yep.
So when you look at it from that perspective, because you want to be so close to your customers, does it make sense for someone to set up shop halfway around the country in the Bay Area with significantly inflated costs? Or if you're serving that industry, you want to get as close to your customers as you possibly can in a locale that has significantly lower costs.
Yep, absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Talking about Milwaukee, talk about the diversity initiatives that the city is actually coming across that you're seeing, especially in the entrepreneurship world.
Sure. Well, it's always a tricky challenge. So I think the first thing that I would recommend to anybody out there is to measure your diversity. So I always say this to our customers in the manufacturing world, and I think it applies to internal operations as well, is that you can't improve what you don't measure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at McGregor Partners, we started implementing this where we get a report that comes out just measuring our diversity. The things we report on are people who identify as anything other than white or primary white, as well as the male versus female breakdown. So we're definitely not where we want to be yet, but I think over the last year, we just started doing this about a year ago. We've made some pretty significant improvements just because we're actually thinking about it. So I think so I was looking at this before this interview, and the national percentages, according to the last census data, we're, I think, 76% white across the country, and then other minorities made up the rest. So as a company, we want to represent the communities that we serve. Because,
absolutely.
Although it's very tempting to just look for a bunch of other clones like me, sassy hoodie-wearing millennials that love to talk about things and have the same cultural references and things like that. But if you do that, I'm sure we'd all get along great. But you're going to have some cultural bias and just some unconscious blind spots built into the product and services that you're delivering. And there have been a lot of studies out there that have shown that a more diverse team will produce better results. So that's something that we're very interested in improving. I can tell you that from a male-female perspective right now, I believe we are, I think 18% women across the country, which obviously is much lower than we want it to be. We'd want that to ultimately be closer to 50-50. But one thing that I'm really proud of is that on the engineering team specifically, so this is the team that I directly manage, we're up to 28% women, which normally at a tech company it's almost the opposite, where they have more women in like marketing and HR, et cetera. And the engineering team is typically the drop-off. But because we've been prioritizing that, we actually have a higher percentage of women on the engineering team than other departments.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, it's that's what it's about, Roman. It's really about the focus and deliberately focusing on it. Not only that, having ways to measure it. And I think that's where a lot of companies are falling short at, is they're not really looking into it.
Sure. So the other metric that we look at is non-white employees, or employees that identify as non-white. I think we're at 16% for that right now, which
nice.
Again, it's nothing to write home about, but when you look at national statistics, we'd love to be in like the 25% range at least, just because we want to be representative of the communities that we're serving.
Exactly.
And I think living in Milwaukee is actually a very diverse city as well.
It is.
So having roots in Milwaukee, I think the African American percentage alone in Milwaukee, I think, is pretty close to 20%.
Wow.
I don't have the exact numbers, so it's definitely an area that we feel that we can improve on. So
well, if you think about it, if it's 20%, you guys are at 16%. That's actually really good, Roman. Right? It's really good. That's what I think it's really about, right? It's really serving the communities, but also at the same time it's being a representation of the location where you are as well, right? And then if I was to say something else, I would say it's really about looking at the actual numbers and really having a goal of where you want to be, right? 16% is good. I would say, especially for a community that's at 20%, right? Of course, it can be better.
Sure.
We know that it can certainly be better. Let's talk about, obviously I founded Black Heights. I think you always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur as well. I think I took a different path from what I originally said my goal was to be, and I really started off thinking that when I would start a business, it would be more of my area of expertise, supply chain support, professional services and things like that. I found my passion always being able to relate with people, but also coaching and supporting them in other ways outside of how I support my customers, which is the reason why Black Heights was found, but also that there's a problem that I'm seeing as I continue to climb the corporate ladder. There isn't a lot of representation for, men of my, or people with the same color as myself, right? I find myself being one of the only guys a lot of the time in the room or in a group, and I see that there's other opportunities for others as well, right? Talk about, when you saw that I founded Black Heights, what was your thoughts behind it, and the initiative that we have going on?
Well, when I first heard about it, I was actually a little bit disappointed that I didn't hear from you, because I found out about it by Teresa, your wife, posting about it on social media.
Yep.
So after I got past my my initial disappointment that you didn't let me know that you're doing this, I looked through the website and we exchanged a couple text messages, and I think it's a fantastic idea. So when you look at whether it's black men or any other group that traditionally can be underserved in certain things, I think it's extremely important to just get positive role models out there.
Yes.
So we talk about this a lot as we're building the technology community in Milwaukee, and part of the reason why the perception outside of the area is that Milwaukee is kind of like a sleepy city that doesn't have a lot going on in the tech community is because we just haven't done a great job of marketing some of our successes and getting some of the technology companies and the entrepreneurs that have set up shop here out on the forefront and sharing their story.
Yep.
And I think once people see that, then they kind of say to themselves, oh, there is some cool stuff going on there. Maybe I could be successful as well.
Absolutely.
So whether it's trying to build a movement here in Milwaukee for technology or trying to create an environment where you can coach people and give them more opportunities to achieve their professional goals, I think just the fact that you're putting yourself out there and people can see you as a successful executive in the technology world, coming from a background that you came from, I think it's going to do a lot, not necessarily even from the coaching, and I know you'll give good advice because you've given me plenty of good advice over the years, but coaching aside, I think just getting your name out there and sharing your story, I think will inspire a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited about what you're doing and to see where it leads you in the coming years.
Awesome. I'm excited that you decided to come on the platform today. One of the things that I like to do in these sort of meetings or in these conversations, Roman, is, I like to kind of talk about, how you balance work in life, right? And, obviously you're married. You're here in Milwaukee. You are an executive for your company. You have, you are a role model within the Milwaukee community for technology and entrepreneurship. You have a lot going on your plate. You're moving to new offices and things like that. How do you balance, family, work, and life?
Well, I don't know that I have any mind-blowing wisdom to impart on the listeners. There's been a lot written about this, especially in the last couple years. I think the most important thing for me is just planning. So my wife and I have what we call a board meeting every Sunday.
Okay, a board meeting. I like that. Tell me more. I'm excited.
And we pretty much go through the week. Now sometimes because we're always thinking long term, we do extend beyond the week, but the immediate focus of that meeting is what do we have going on that week.
Yeah.
And it's just really important to talk to each other because a lot of times Katie works as well. She's also very busy. She's got a lot of stuff going on. And we would find ourselves just like not even talking to each other. We'd both get home late, go to bed, and then wake up and do it all over again. We had no idea what the other person was working on. So just going through the schedule, making sure we're supporting each other and we know what's going on. We also only have one car, so understanding what's happening with that helps as well. And that has been a tremendous help, just being organized with our time. So not only does it help Katie know what I'm working on, and does it help her know what I'm working on, but typically when we go through our schedule, we try to look at it from different aspects of our life. So we'll say, okay, this is what I have going on at work this week. This is what you have going on at work. Is there anything we need to do to support each other in any of these endeavors, etc.? Okay, then once we finish that, then we'll talk about other things that we have going on. These are things that we like to do to keep our sanity and to stay fit, etc. So maybe she's going to a Pilates class on Wednesday, then because I know she's not going to be home, then maybe I'll try to do my exercise routine on that same night, try to align things. We'll talk about our family. Is there anything that we need to do for our family? Do I need to make a phone call to somebody? Do I need to pick something up for a family member, etc.? I actually even go as far as slotting out 8 hours to sleep every night. If you look at my calendar, I have sleep slotted.
Wow.
8 hours every night. I don't always get a full 8, but I at least try to plan for it. And basically just looking at all the different aspects of your life and trying to plan that out, that's really helped me be a lot more organized and try to be more deliberate and make time for certain things. So for example, I mentioned earlier that I'm a big science fiction fan. I love to read. Sometimes I read business books, sometimes it's science fiction, etc. But normally I try to carve out at least 4 hours per week for reading. And I found that if I don't put it in my calendar, sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Right.
So I will put something in my calendar for reading,
Yep.
or I'll put something in my calendar for going to play basketball or going for a run or something like that. And if it's in my calendar, then I've found that, at least for me, it is a lot more likely to get done. And I always joke that if someone ever hacks my calendar and puts a bunch of random stuff in there, I'm just gonna like show up at random events and be completely lost.
That would actually be a pretty good joke on you. No, but what it sounds like I heard, Roman, was, obviously having a balance between work, family, and life. It's really about communication, right? But also, you have your way of doing it, and you call it a board meeting, where you sit there with
Yep.
Katie and you schedule and you plan. Right, that's important, because if you don't plan, typically nothing is going to happen. You work on the schedule. You have a schedule that you actually use, which sounds like religiously, in order for that to keep you on your plan and keep you continuing to go and execute the things that you need to execute. I find that to be very, very important. But also at the same time, it's a sacrifice on some of the things that you probably want to do, but you can't do when you have a plan.
Well, let me put it this way. Everyone out there is very good at being busy.
Everybody is, yes.
You don't need to plan to be busy. You can find things to do.
Yes.
And oftentimes, if you don't plan, other people have a way of claiming your time and getting you to work on stuff that you don't necessarily want to be prioritizing. So without being very adamant with your schedule and very organized with your planning, you're going to be rowing the boat very quickly, but you might not be necessarily steering it in the right direction. To me, it's very important to kind of pop my head up on deck once a week and just make sure we're heading in the right direction. We're spending time on the things that we want to spend time on, because otherwise we're going to be just as busy, but not necessarily on the things that we want to be spending our time on.
You hear that, folks? You hear that from the Roman Reynebeau plan. Mr. Rose said he'd live on his calendar, right? He said calendars make it real. And he also said, I get my schedule every morning via Google at 5 a.m. It's very important. It's very important. I find myself, when I plan my days, I execute a lot better.
Yes. It's
right?
the last thing I look at before I go to bed, and it's the first thing I look at
when you wake up. Nice. I have that's something I'll take away for me to get even better. I have a plan, but my plan is towards my vision that I look at every single day. It's not the hourly schedule of my day. Now, yes, I do have that in my calendar because I'm a professional, right? I have meetings and stuff like that. But I don't. That's not the first thing I do when I wake up, unless I know there's going to be a typical call. I work in habit as well. That's something I can certainly get better at, to probably be more productive by planning. I just remember when I was in grad school, you had to find time, and that's when I did use my calendar religiously, right? Because I just had a baby, we just bought a house, right? I had grad school, I had my job, a full-time job, right? So things had to be put on the calendar in order for me to find time to actually do it. And I think that's the best way, seriously, for you to find a balance in the things that you really want to do and execute the things that you really want to do, even when it comes down to just having time with your wife.
Yes.
Seriously.
I
agree. My wife and I live by the code of, we put the kids down at like 7, and we have at least an hour and a half to ourselves during that time. So typically it's around 7, anytime between 7 and 9, basically, where we spend time with each other. That's our plan. It's not on the calendar though, but we already know that that's what works based on the communication. But yeah, that's wonderful, Roman. That's a really good feedback.
The other thing I would challenge everyone out there to do is be very, what's the right word? Guard your time as much as you can. So if you put something in your calendar, let's say, at the end of every week, I schedule time to just think. So I can do whatever I want with it, but I schedule an hour at the end of each week to just kind of review the week and think about some of the things that have happened and process everything. And it's very tempting sometimes when, let's say, a customer or a coworker tries to schedule something during that time to just accept it, right? But at the same time, you need to learn how to say no sometimes. And you don't have to use the word no, because that feels a little aggressive sometimes, but just be more mindful of what your commitments are. So 99% of the time, if someone sends you a meeting invite and you say, I'm sorry, I have a pre-existing commitment during this time slot, could we move it to this time slot instead?
Yeah.
99% of the time, they're going to be accommodating and they're going to move for you. So don't be afraid to get a little bit more out in front of your scheduling and kind of be more proactive with it. I guess my point is, don't let other people control your schedule.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. And a lot of people try to control your schedule.
Yes, they do.
Especially in the professional world. We have another question from Mrs. Tamara, and she said both of us mentioned how you rely on your calendars and the plans. How do you adjust when things don't go to plan?
Mass chaos.
I'll take a start. For me personally, when things don't go as planned, I'm pretty calm about it. I do not react to things that are challenges when they come up, because I know challenges can be solved. So you find people, go into like mass hysteria, and they get really anxious when things don't go to plan. I've never been that type of person, and that's just maybe a quality or a skill that I've developed over time. And I just remember something in specific, and this is not really around plans or anything like that, but just my reaction to things is, I remember when one of my customers, WMS, went down, right? Everybody's freaking out on the floor and we can't ship, blah, blah, blah. And they're looking at Antoine. I'm just like, okay, it's a problem we got to deal with. We got to fix it, right? But what it does, it shows that, everybody's not freaking out. We got somebody who's calm and cool and collected. He's going to be able to execute. And they saw me as a leader, as their leader at that point in time, right? So when things don't go as planned for me, I just look at it as any other challenge that you have to go through and have to deal with, right? And that's just about everything in life sometimes, right? Things don't go as planned, especially if you're looking at things by the minute and by the hour. You have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to adapt. You have to have that skill to become a lot more flexible. So, Tam, that's kind of my answer from my side. I hopefully I answered your question. Let's give Roman a shot to answer that as well. How do you adapt?
I would say you just need to be agile and flexible, similar to your answer. I don't think any day ever goes exactly according to plan.
Right.
If you expect every minute of every day to be perfectly planned, you're going to be setting yourself up for disappointment.
And it's no fun either, right? You're not living life if things go as planned, right? Like it's sometimes chaos is a bit fun.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I would say if you do have commitments with somebody, so let's say you have a coffee date with a prospect or a client or something like that, and something comes up so you can't make it. Well, that's fine. You can cancel if you have to, but I would say if some sort of emergency comes up and you need to clear your calendar, just at least be courteous enough to reach out to the people that you're canceling on with enough notice.
Yes.
Or at least have someone else reach out to them for you, because having been on the other side of this, it's never fun when you get ghosted.
It's never fun.
Telling someone else that your time is more important than their time.
Absolutely.
So obviously sometimes things come up, but as soon as you find out that you're going to need to clear out your entire afternoon, let everybody know immediately so that they can change their plans accordingly.
Absolutely. Hands down. You have to be respectful of other people's time. That's, something that you can't get back at all. Anybody can get back his time. So, Roman, I think this was a wonderful podcast. For the folks who are watching, I like to do this, and, I got to go back and correct all the titles and on the stream and stuff like that. And typically what I do is I put the key points of the conversation into it, so that when somebody comes to it and they read it, they know what this conversation is about. I started off talking about persistence and determination, of how I saw you consistently pushing forward even when things didn't go your way, right? That's something that I just know Roman with, right? And Roman was always that person. I always asked the question why too, but Roman was that person when I said this. I said, Roman, whenever you need anything from me, just come to me. But also at the same time, just figure it out. Like, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just go and do it. And if you need any help, get it done. And he was always that person that always was able to deliver. And was one of the easiest, engineers that I've ever managed myself. And I was new to management at that point in time. But getting to the point where somebody coming to this video and watching it, wanting to understand what this conversation and what this podcast is about, what are 3 takeaways that you would want them to, come away with after our conversation today?
Wow. Okay. Well, let me think about that for a minute. I guess in light of the theme of this episode, number 1 would be that the path to success isn't always through credentials or prestige, things like that. A lot of times it's just sticking with it. So
determination.
I forget the famous Thomas Edison quote, so I'm probably butchering it, but for those of you who don't know, Thomas Edison was a very famous inventor, and he was very famous for iterating and going through a lot of prototypes and failing very quickly. So the quote goes something along the lines of, if I've failed 1,000 times, I haven't failed, I've just found 1,000 ways that it's not going to work.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I think that applies in a lot of areas of life, whether it's a personal relationship or your professional career goals or building a company, whatever you're working on. A lot of times, just sticking with it and putting yourself out there, understanding that you don't know, asking for help, thinking about things from different angles and trying to figure out new, innovative ways to solve problems, you're eventually going to get it. Number 2, seems how you're giving me this forum. I would say that I want everyone who's listening to this to walk away knowing that there's a lot of cool things happening in the entrepreneurship scene here in Milwaukee.
Yep.
Like I said, I'm very involved in the tech community, and I didn't share the story earlier, so if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
When I first joined McGregor Partners, this was about 3.5 years ago, and at the time I was kind of frustrated with my current position. I was really looking for a change, and working in the tech community, I was naturally drawn to the West Coast, similar to where you're at right now, because my perception was that that's where all the action was. And as someone who comes from an engineering background, there's different levels of prestige. I won't go into all the details on that, but basically all engineers want to work at a tech company where technology is in the bread and butter of the business and you're adding very real value to the business. So that's why when you look at companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, whatever, they're able to recruit such strong engineering candidates because their company is technology. They're a technology company versus working at, let's say, an insurance company or something like that, where traditionally they haven't been marketing themselves as a technology company. So the problems don't seem as exciting. So.
Yep.
Again, that was my perception. I actually interviewed at a couple of companies out there, and I had a lot of very long conversations with my wife about potentially relocating to the West Coast. And ultimately, the deciding factor for us was that all of our friends are here, all of our family is here. We had been in Milwaukee for quite some time, and every hypothetical that we played out in our heads involved us eventually coming back to Milwaukee to start a family.
Yeah.
So at some point we asked ourselves the question, well, if this is just going to be a resume builder, if it's going to be a short-term thing, why would we flush all of the networks we've built? Why would we flush all of the relationships we've built here in Milwaukee and go out to the West Coast if we're just going to turn around and move back in a couple years?
Right.
So at the time, my perception was that there really wasn't a whole lot going on in Milwaukee in the tech scene, and at the time, that might have been true.
Yeah.
So where my where I feel extremely blessed and lucky is that I was talking with Jason, who's the president and CEO here at McGregor, and they were looking at creating a new line of business at McGregor, which is delivering software solutions. And I was given the opportunity to not only open an office here in Milwaukee and pretty much have my dream job here in Milwaukee, but to build something in the community that created opportunities for other people to have the types of opportunities that I was looking for right here in Milwaukee without having to move their families and uproot their lives. So that's just one small success story. There have been a million other startups popping up in the neighborhood. There's actually a company right across the street from us and a lot of other people in the Third Ward neighborhood, to name a few. Digital Measures, Penrod, Tech Canary, Wantable. They've all been on the Inc. 5000 list the last couple years running, so lots of fast-growing tech companies in the Milwaukee area.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. And what about the third thing? What would you say? Let me do a quick recap, right? Is, keep at it. It's really about that determination, right? You're not going to be successful unless you try. And when you do try, there's going to be times where you suffer failures and defeats, right? But keep at it, right? And then, Milwaukee is a popping scene. I mean, like I gotta say, it's from what I'm hearing, and not only that, it's just what I've experienced too. You think about it, Red Prairie was headquartered in this area for the most part, right? That's where our careers first started. And you think about it, technology, you're like, wow, we're a technology company. I never really looked at it that way, but we were headquartered here, right? There's a lot of things that's going really good about the city of Milwaukee and the surrounding area that's has a lot to do with technology. What would you say your third thing is? Somebody take.
So we didn't talk about this explicitly, but I think the most important thing when you're pursuing a goal, whether it's professionally or personal or anything, is just taking that first step. How long did you think about getting an MBA? Years, Roman.
I would say, I wanted to do it at least 2-3 years after I graduated. So I graduated from university in 2005, right? And I didn't go back and get my MBA until 2014.
You thought about it for a while.
Thought about it for a long time.
But once you got started, was it really that hard?
It was not.
So I think
one of the best decisions that I've ever made.
Exactly. So a lot of people know what they want to do and they have ideas. For example, I have one friend who he's really big into craft brewing. He has this dream of starting his own craft brewery. And every time I talk to him, I'm like, dude, just do it.
Just do it.
It's not that hard.
Mikey, just do it.
You can figure it out. So I think just having that self-awareness to really zero in on what you want. And once you decide what you want, just do it.
Just do it.
That first step is always the hardest, but once you get into it, once you start to get your bearings and get connected into the community and figure things out, if you will, it's going to be a lot easier. And the dirty secret that nobody talks about is we're all just kind of figuring this out as we go.
Absolutely.
So there's no reason why someone who's passionate and persistent and resourceful and really wants to go after something cannot be successful.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think those are great keys and great takeaways, Roman. Let me just do a recap on what I heard Roman say. And the reason why I'm looking down, guys, is because I'm taking notes, and I'm using my phone to take notes because I didn't bring a notepad. But keep at it, determination, right? And that's huge, right? That's something that when I think of somebody who's determined to get something done, I think about Roman Reynebeau, right? It's like there's nothing that's going to stop this guy. He's going to walk through a wall. He's going to do whatever he needs to do in order for him to get there. He may not, get there the first try. He may strike out. You may strike out multiple times, right? You may have a bad game completely, but one thing that I know about you is that you're determined and you're going to get there. You're going to hit a home run eventually, right? And have that game-winning hit. Milwaukee, it being absolutely a wonderful, fantastic city, not only to live, but a place that's thriving in technology and people and diversity. I would say the same thing about Milwaukee. I don't think I would choose to live here because of the weather and what it's outside right now. It's pretty cold, but it is an absolutely fantastic city with a lot of brilliant people that lives in the city, and a lot of technology that's around here as well. And at the end of the day, guys, when you have a goal, part of the determination piece of it you got to continue to do it. But the first step is always your hardest. Just freaking do it. Just do it, right? I mean, like that. There's a reason why Nike came out with that slogan, because it is so hard to start something, right? It is so hard for people to start something. And taking that first step is the most important, because after that, you just figure it out, and you're going to realize that most people in life are just figuring it out. But a lot of people are scared just to take that first step because they think it has to be perfect in order for them to, to succeed. And it's nothing is going to be perfect at all.
You mind if I add a fourth?
Add a fourth, absolutely.
So part of taking that first step is knowing when to ask for help.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think that although I've been persistent, stubborn, whatever you want to call it, part of the reason why I've been able to be successful is just building my network and knowing when to reach out for help. And having a mentor that you look up to, that has kind of been there, has more experience than you, and someone you can just bounce ideas off of, I think is invaluable in anybody's career. So I'd like to thank you for part of that. So Antoine mentioned earlier, he kind of took me under his wing early in my career.
Thank you,
and
man.
He's given me some pretty good advice over the years. I've also had my father in my life, who, like I mentioned, is a small business owner, and my father-in-law, who I didn't even talk about, but he's an executive at an international company as well. So between the three of you, anytime I have anything that I'm really struggling with and I'm not sure what to do, it's really nice having people like that in my life that I feel confident that I can reach out to day or night, any time of the day, and just kind of describe what I'm going through and get an intelligent, thoughtful opinion on how I can go about solving that problem.
Absolutely, guys. I mean, that's fantastic, and thank you, Roman. We find ways to push each other every single day. I think we compete, and not only that, it's just, I've learned a lot from yourself, and you've learned a lot from me, and it's absolutely right. It's about having people that's part of your life and in your network that are mentors for you, because if you don't have that, it's very hard to get to where you're going. Whenever there's a struggle, whenever there's a situation that comes up that you may not know about, and that's always around the corner. And it's always good to have people that's in your life that has your back and that can give you that advice in your network, right? Absolutely. So, fantastic. Let me just reiterate those points again, right? Because I like to hone it in so that people can have a takeaway, right? Keep at it, determination. Milwaukee is a great city. Just do it. And last but not least, have mentors and have a strong network, because that's really what's going to help you out in the long run as well too. So guys, I would like to thank you all for joining the podcast today. I know it was a bit of a clunky situation, but we made the most out of it, and it was my fault for not getting the technology checked out right away. But I think it was an absolutely fantastic show. Thank you so much to all the people that are in the chat who had a chance to participate with us and watch us live. Thank you so much, Roman, for allowing me to come to, your hometown, your office, to really have a conversation with you about, the things that you're doing in life and how you've been able to accomplish your professional goals and the, determination that you have, so that, this can somehow in one day encourage other people to get to where you are and where I am, and be that influential person to other people in our lives. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, right, you are an avid technologist, you are in the scenes, how could they reach you if they wanted to reach out to you? What's any social media platforms you use?
Well, I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn. Easiest way to get a hold of me is probably LinkedIn. I check that the most often. I mentioned mentorship earlier, so I not only do I have mentors for myself, but there's plenty of other people that I've taken under my wing that are more early on in their career. So even if we've never met before, if you live in the Milwaukee area, or even if you're remote, if you want to have a phone call or you want to meet for coffee, I always make time to kind of pay it forward and help other people get ahead.
Yep, very cool.